Hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of Access Granted podcast, where we talk about the latest trends in identity and access security, bring you latest trends, case studies, knowledge lessons. We invite professionals, security architects, DevOps architects, IAM architects, and obviously innovators and engineering founders as well. And today, we're very happy to welcome Sameer Hiremath, who is the co-founder and head of engineering of a cloud privileged access management security company called Britive. Welcome, Sameer. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Don. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's fantastic. And normally, we invite several practitioners from different backgrounds, and we always are very excited to hear from engineering perspective on how things get, ideated, how things get envisioned, and eventually things get, built and put to use with customers. So very excited to see you here and look forward to an engaging discussion. Before I start, I wanted to really ask, tell us something about your background, right? You have a long background in identity and security, how it all gets started, and what made you stay in this area for so long, to a point where from a practitioner to a, almost like a early member of another startup and then a co-founder and head of engineering. Well, tell us about your background and journey.
All right. Yeah. So started maybe about 20 years ago in this space, right? And the first company that I ever worked for was doing SSO solutions, a company called Integrity, right? And since then, it's pretty much the same journey, right? Started with the authentication and SSO, moved on to the governance side of the world, right? With IGA solutions, PAM, and then, figured that all of these have to be adopted to the cloud, right? And how it's going to be different. And here we are, right? And that's how we started Britive and founded that.
That's fantastic. So what was your motivation when you were looking to conceive this idea about Britive, right? What were the, problem landscape? And obviously there were things that were really matured at that time in the privileged access management space. But what was your vision and what gaps you saw? What was your thought process between you and the founding team in terms of, hey, this is a big enough problem and the idea is validated by customers and let's go and build something innovative. What was your thought process back then?
Yeah, so by other founders and me, right, I think all of us have spent time in this industry, right, and for quite a while, right? When we were kind of looking at what is this really missing, right? Again, back to what I said earlier about the cloud, right? I think the cloud brings different challenges, right? So, the problem that you have remains the same, right? Where it operates on is different. So when we were looking at privileged access and we looked at the cloud, there were certainly gaps, right? Because to begin with, legacy solutions, right? And if I can call them legacy, right? And on-prem were more focused on servers, databases, right? When you look at the cloud, you have services, right? I mean, AWS has about 250 of them, right? GCP, pretty much as much, and so does Azure, right? And none of this focuses on what we call as entitlements, right? Infrastructure entitlements, right? So there's really nothing backing it. There's no real server DB. I mean, they are obviously there, but there is a lot more to it. So when you started looking at that and you said, okay, how are we going to really define what privileged access is in the cloud, right? How are we going to solve it?
Yeah.
It presented us with an option, right? And a solution. And not to mention, right, humans is one aspect of it, but in the cloud, you've got service identities, right? Service identities across cloud, right? With AWS, this whole concept of cross-account access, right? So when we started thinking about all of this, we said, okay, here is a problem that we need to solve, right? And when we are talking with, at that point, we were talking to a few of our customers, right? Other folks in the industry that, we kind of knew and understood this problem, right? And, folks in the cloud space, right? Of how they are going to be handling this problem, right? Looking at all of it, we said, okay, this is the type of solution we need, right? And that's pretty much how the whole journey started, right? That's really what it is.
That's fantastic. I agree that in the cloud has fundamentally changed the rules of the game in terms of how the identity and access works in the cloud. And I think this is something like 4 or 5 years ago when you conceived the idea and you came up with this whole cloud privilege access management category, I think, which is now becoming a category of its own, CPAM. The whole concept again that you guys brought is, how can we leverage the native constructs of the cloud and build something very new and different as opposed to a slightly better version of the old and try to retrofit in the cloud. So I think that was pretty innovative. And the thing that I like about this is it's not just a good idea, but I think you validated this with several customers and CISOs. But tell us about, how did you, obviously, your founders were smart enough. You understood the identity space really, really well. You saw the shift moving to the cloud and how things would evolve from an identity and access perspective. But what was your thought process in validating that idea? How did you interact with the customers and got CISOs involved? So say something about that aspect as well.
So like I was telling you earlier, right? When we figure out here is the problem statement, right? The other thing is, try to understand from a customer and CISOs, right, for that matter, what is their pain point, right? And now there is another angle to this, right? So we talk about, you've got hybrid environments, then you have cloud migration, right? And then we have cloud transformation or modernization, right? So every customer is probably in some, maturity or journey of this, right? So some are just moving to the cloud and all they focus on is take my data center, put it in the cloud, right? That's migration. Now to leverage the full power of the cloud, it's migration. That really is what is transformation or modernization, right? Leverage some of the native services and whatnot that the cloud offers. So when we were talking to customers, right, we had to talk to one in every sort of space, right, and where they were, right, to understand really what the pain point is. When you had someone just moving, just getting started with their migration exercise, probably there is obviously some wisdom you can gather from them, right? But the real ones were the ones who were, moving from the migration to the transformation, right? So they had moved some service to the cloud. They were doing all of the privileged access, but now here comes the transformation part, right? That's where you got a lot of the information from about what really it means, right? And what does really privilege mean in the cloud, right? So that's, again, that's what we were trying to look at.
When you got this idea that this is something that you want to really work on, how did you end up figuring out how it would all look like in a CSP SaaS world, right? What was thinking about, how we are going to build this SaaS backend? Obviously, you need to look at security, performance, scales, reliability. And, for someone who has been working in the on-prem world, then automatically trying to shift and build an architecture all in cloud. I'm sure that there's probably one or two cloud providers who would be your motivation to say and start working with them. So how, as an engineering founder, right, how it basically motivated you or helped you figure out something that you can build for large enterprises? Because obviously you're not building something for just mom and pop shops, right? Because once you have things in marketplace, you could have a customer with 5 users, you could have a customer with 5,000 users, right? So you don't have the luxury to say, no, I cannot sell it to a 5,000 user customer. So what was your thinking and how cloud or CSP helped you in terms of taking your vision and realizing the as actual production product, which now you have several large customers credit to you guys at Britive here. But what was your thought process back then?
So, that's a good question, right? So from a background perspective, right? Obviously, I've been in the legacy software world, right? I call it legacy only because, everything these days is SaaS, right? So it was all about you build software, right? You give them hardware specs and you run with it, right? And say this is how the software is going to run, right?
Yeah.
Then you worry about patching, right? And then you worry about, upgrades. And then, this whole thing just kind of is everything that a customer kind of needs, right? To basically adopt that product, right? Do more with it. But it always requires assistance on the customer side, right? They have to have a team to manage it, right? So one of the things we were absolutely certain about, that's not the way to go, right? So obviously that's SaaS, right? Once you look at SaaS, what are the things you need to consider, right? So first things first is how soon can we build things, right? So that's leveraging the constructs that the cloud provides, like the AWS, the GCPs, or the Azures, right? What services do they provide? What we don't have to worry about is the maintenance, right? Do I need to patch the servers? Do I need to, upgrade them? All of that goes away, right? Because the cloud, pretty much they handle it for you. So all you focus on is, here's a service, I need to use it, right? And there is plenty, right? Things like queues, right? Messaging services, right? You've got different, flavors of databases. You've got NoSQL databases. You can pretty much use anything you want, right? And you focus on the best service for the right solution, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, like you talked about, a scale, right? That's what the cloud gives, right? It's not bound by any hardware, right? You can auto scale and do a whole bunch of different things. And last thing, our product, right? We have everything serverless, right? So we don't have any kind of virtual instances that are running like, AWS, they call them EC2. So nothing runs on that, right? It's everything serverless, which allows us to basically expand and collapse, right? At will. The other thing is, we also have the ability to, if someone says that, hey, we don't want to use your shared infrastructure, we want to use something of our own, we can spin that up and maintain it like we have our existing infrastructure, right? The shared infra. So it gives us a lot of different permutations and combinations to handle this. I think that's what the cloud brings for us, right?
That's a great point. And I think this begs me to ask a question that, let's say if I am a customer, right? And today there are a lot of legacy players, right, who say we also do things in the cloud, right? And there's so much confusion. I attended this identity verse about 6 months ago or 4 months ago. There were 80 plus vendors all saying the same messaging. Yeah, we do also in the cloud. And it really, it's confusing for customers on how do you evaluate something, right? What is better for me? Now, obviously, this whole angle of build as a SaaS, true SaaS in the cloud, with all of the goodness of the power of cloud provides in terms of serverless or resiliency or scalability, speed of innovation, all of that is in a way is a factor here. But as a customer, how does it benefit? I mean, do I see benefit in terms of the end results back to me? If I'm going with a legacy player who's saying that I am also hosted in the cloud versus a new player who say we are true SaaS. So what would I see as a benefit to me as an end customer?
So I think SaaS has been used differently, right? One is what I call true SaaS, right? Which is, shared infra, right? And, different customers obviously on the same platform, right? Then there is what I call as the hosted version of the SaaS, right? Which means you put everything, right, in terms of the software, put it on the cloud, right? Give them access to it, and it's your own. I'm hosting it, and I'm managing it for you, right? So it's almost a managed hosted solution, right? Versus SaaS. Look, both of them have, I guess merits, demerits, right? But when you're looking at true SaaS, what you really care about is how soon is my environment handled, right? How soon can I get features? How soon can I get fixes, right? And things like that, right? When it's managed, and if every customer has their own management their own hosted instance, from a deployment perspective, obviously a large team can handle that kind of a deployment by deploying to all of the instances at the same time, right? But if it's true SaaS, it's one deployment, everything happens, right? Similarly, with any kind of downtime, any kind of resiliency, right? HADR, right? True SaaS solution, that's what you have to build using that, right? A hosted solution would be a little bit different, right? If that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the deciding factor these days in terms of customers. And I come from a very similar startup world where I've seen firsthand the impact or the efficiency a true SaaS model creates in terms of maintenance and speed of innovation, because you are not dealing with 5 different branches for 5 different customers, right? Because you have the patching, the upgrades, the innovation, it's all one. So the speed of innovation, the speed of fixes and stability and upgradability becomes much easier if you're a true SaaS platform, and it all becomes visible for customers in terms of uptime and the quality of the deployment that they have with certain vendor. So it's perfect.
I was just going to expand on that, Naman.
Go ahead.
In a very simple way of looking at it, right? If you use let's talk about shared infra, right? You could be deployed across different regions, across different availability zones, right? And we as a vendor will manage all of your residency, right? Everything HADR, right? Whether it's active, right? Or, even within one region, we handle all of it, right? If it's a hosted solution, for example, all of that has to be built individually for every customer, right? So there is a big difference, right, in handling that.
Yeah.
And obviously, if it's a hosted solution, right, and you're not on shared infrastructure, it's going to cost you a little more money, right? Because if you have to go to replicate everything else somewhere else, it's going to cost you money.
Yeah. And I think eventually it will trickle down to customer and services cost or support cost, because you need to have people to manage all these deployments. And all of a sudden you say, okay, how come my support and services contract is so expensive as compared to a true SaaS solution? Great. So my next angle that I want to cover with you, right, is from your lens, right? These days, a lot of customers are talking about static access and over-provisioned access, right? And we have seen that there's so many breaches these days. You go and ask ChatGPT, give me all the recent breaches around identity access that happens through a password breach or secrets stolen. There are many high-profile cases, and even one secret or one password that get hacked could basically bring the entire enterprise down on its knees, right? If it's a over-privileged account, your intellectual theft, you have customer data, privacy concerns that can all be compromised. And this is what we have learned from different breaches that have happened in the past, that identities become the new parameter for security. From your perspective, right, what do you see as the biggest risk of over-provision and static access controls? And, what would be the way, your advice to all these enterprises who have invested in legacy world, now looking to modernize? How do you see that? And what would be your advice for those customers?
Yeah, so I think when you talk about static access, right, I think there is the authorization side of the word. It's really what access any kind of identity has, right? Like I said, identity is the new parameter, so now it's out in the open, right? There is identity, and there's a whole bunch of things that they can access, right?
Yeah.
And how do you access it? It's credentials, right? You have access keys, right, for using APIs, right? A lot of the CLIs are built on that, right? And then you have service-to-service communication, right? With developers are coding stuff up, trying to contact some other API. And it's not unfathomable, right, to perceive that they would leave some of these keys, right, in their source code or somewhere else, right? We've heard and seen cases like this, right?
Yeah.
So I think there are two parts, right? The first one is, try and minimize your credential, right? So a developer doesn't need, static access keys for everything. That's where we have the whole concept of dynamic credentials, right? And then it's the authorization. So even if you get a dynamic credential, it doesn't give you the keys to the kingdom. It gives you a dynamic credential against a set of authorizations, right? So that's really how we kind of look at the solution, right? Now, moving on the other side of the world, right? And we're talking about things like administrator access, right? So let's assume that a user is a global admin in Azure, right? Or maybe, in AWS. The question is, they don't do that all the time, right? When you talk about right sizing, as like certifications in IGA and whatnot, right? What they focus on, is it okay for this user to have this access? Sure, right? He's an admin, you maintain it. But the question is, do they use this all the time, right? So what happens? It reduces your risk when it's not always on, but more dynamic, right? So that's probably how you want to think about it. IGA solve for a purpose, right? They make sure that you don't have, based on, a certification process or based on what you used. And that's the problem they solve for. So you're kind of right-sized in a way using an IGA solution. We go one step further and say, it's okay for you to have this, but it's not okay for you to have this all the time, right? So that's sort of where that's how you want to kind of think about it.
No, that's perfect. I think the both actually, in another podcast, one of the guests that I was talking to, he mentioned that IDP, IGA, and CPAM, which is where Britive belongs, are basically three key layers of this new modern identity stack. There could be other layers as well, but at least these three makes up that minimal modern tech stack that you would want to probably invest in in order to get almost like areas that are all covered from identity perspective. Now, moving on, from a perspective of obviously you're an engineering leader as well. Innovation probably is top of your mind, especially in this world where things are coming left and right. All from both security perspective and AI perspective. And I think Britive, being a cloud PAM leader in that space, you always have innovation on top of your mind. There are always things that you're thinking of. There are things that people in your company who are creative, they're thinking of. Their customers who are probably motivating you to bring new things. So what are some of the advancements that you see in the next 3 to 5 years, both in the identity security space as well as integrating some of the goodness of AI into both as part of your platform as well as, maybe helping customers with some of the AI use cases? Where do you see this industry go and what does it mean to Britive?
I think back to one of the things that we discussed earlier, right, Naman, about, the migration journey, right? When I talk about the whole cloud, or maybe I should say migration, I should say cloud adoption, right? So data center, cloud migration to cloud modernization or transformation, right? So every company, is going to have their journey, right? So what I think is going to happen from a CPAM perspective is the realization, right, that migration is different from transformation, right? And whatever solutions you have may not really work, right? And maybe we could talk about certain use cases and certain customers, right, that we've seen who've gone through this journey, and talk about that a little bit later. But this is sort of the first part of it, right?
Yeah.
So the solution has to basically help them go across this entire journey, right? Otherwise, you're going to have a point solution for legacy, right? Hybrid, something that will help you in the migration, and then something else that's going to help you in transformation, right? So that's one part. So this is a solution that handles this entire journey. On the AI side of the world, I think, in today's world, we already have this concept of authentication, right? And adaptive authentication. The Oktas of the world, right? The Azures, they do all of that, right? But again, that's focused on authentication, right? I think at some point we need to understand authentication is different from authorization, right? What you have is very different from who you are, right? And what you do. So at some point you need to figure out, what does a user do, right? Is this his daily pattern of usage of his authorizations? And really figure out, how do you make that more adaptive, right? That's really what you need to focus on. And that's why we are looking at what that means. The next piece is obviously anomaly detection. For example, why is Norman, looking at administrator access on AWS on a Sunday at, 3 o'clock in the morning, right? Obviously we have in our product, we have some checks and balances, right? We look at, kind of approvals and maybe some sort of a production issue, right? That we can connect with an IDSM system and figure out maybe this is really a case, right? But those are all the rules, right, around how do you see that whether it's an anomaly or not. But the rest of it, you got to detect that, look, there is an anomaly. You got to do something about it, right? So that's where I think a lot of the ML and AI will come in.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Very powerful. Detect before it becomes an issue, detect things before it becomes a problem. And that's why I think I sometimes call CPAM as a prevention, cyber prevention category or product, where how can you basically deter and proactively figure out issues that may happen in your environment and block them or stop them right there. So it's very powerful. Anything from developers' perspective, because I feel that more and more the developers are logging into different Lambda services or EC2s or databases or Salesforce. Anything that the Britive product is doing or have plans to do that will make life easier for developers, so they don't have to go and feel that this is a additional burden for them to get into this rhythm of having a privileged access just in time.
So I think one of the things is whatever you do, right? I think we have to make sure that developers use the tools that they already are familiar with, right? Try to overburden them with something that, here's yet another tool that you have to do something special, right? I think that's it obviously creates some sort of friction, right? So in our product, what sort of what we pride ourselves on is the fact that you continue to use what you're using, right? And we find a way to plug in behind the scenes, right, to get you what you need. So, for example, when you look at, AWS CLI or anything like that, right? Run the command, right? The way you run AWS CLI, right? Do whatever you got to do. But under the covers, Britive will do its magic, right? To get you whatever you need in terms of the authorization and your keys, right? So that's sort of, I think, you gotta kind of make sure that don't break away from what everyone is already used to, right? Same thing with CI/CD processes. You have to figure out how to insert yourself in between without creating friction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the default answer is no to a change, or people do not want to change habits, right? So the more we can do to meet where the users are, the better it is for people to adopt certain security postures that we want to implement and bring to life. So I think it's great to hear that Britive is working on programmability and meeting the customers where they are. In terms of you as engineering leader, and obviously I've seen that all the engineering leaders and entire engineering, they always want to know how the innovation is being consumed, right? How people or customers are actually benefiting from what they're building, right? And in a obviously sometimes in a siloed way. But what are you most proud of in terms of the things that you have built and helping customers in a certain way or improving the security posture? What is generally you're proud of in your engineering team?
Yeah, so I think when we started the product, right, or built it, right, one of the things that we wanted to make sure is that whatever we build, right, has to be, you should be able to automate it and integrate it, right? So Britive is all API first, right? So whenever you get into any kind of customer environment, right, and I'll talk to you about a couple of examples, right? First things first, right? Are you able to integrate within whatever they have, right? For example, if they have their own IDP, which is a given these days, right? You should be able to kind of integrate with that, right? But other thing is all of their tooling, right? All of their build processes or whatnot, right? So, and integration with other SaaS apps. So all of that is a given, right? I mean, that's pretty much non-negotiable, right? It is the integration. The second thing is time to value, right? How long does it take to deploy this? So I'll give you an example that we've seen at a customer, right? And I'll give you a couple of more, right? Remember, I keep coming back to the same thing, the migration and the transformation, right? So here's a customer that basically moved everything to the cloud, right? So the cloud migration part of it, right? They got some of the servers, on the cloud, right?
Yep.
And realized that, hey, their cloud transformation isn't really working, right? Because they don't have a solution for it. So what did they end up doing? They built something. Right? And they say, okay, we're going to build something for this, and that's going to solve the problem for now, right? Then, as part of their own cloud adoption, that now they go multi-cloud, right? Maybe they have AWS, GCP, they have Azure, right? Then they have, maybe like a Snowflake or some DaaS platform. So whatever they looked at, right, from the build perspective, they built to solve a problem that was addressing that particular pain point, right? But it was not going to help them expand across everything else that they had.
Yeah.
So when we went to this, when we talked to this customer, right, they had the exact same problem. They built something, and it wasn't going to work as they were expanding, and that's when they came to us. And they have over about 800 AWS accounts that they manage. They've got Azure, they've got GCP, they've got Snowflake, right? And for all of that, this is sort of the solution, right? And they were able to kind of get us deployed in less than a couple of months, right? And of course, as they expanded, the product just expanded with every other use case that they were kind of looking at, right? Like I said, we started with AWS, went to GCP, Snowflake, and it just kept working.
That's great. I think this is a great point. So for similar customers, right, who are in a similar boat where they did the cloud migration, now they're looking towards modernization, getting the most out of their cloud deployments, right? Because it's agility, it's speed, it's faster go to market, it's efficiency, it's innovation. But there are many customers who have not crossed that bridge yet. They're still moving to the cloud, still hanging on to their legacy solutions, which is obviously the comfort zone. They know the product, they know the processes. What would be your advice to them? Right? I'm sure that you come from the same world. you have been in that shoes or those shoes, what would be your advice how to take that switch to look towards a modern world and start to realize the value that the customer that you mentioned is realizing as well?
I'm going to start with an example, right? And then maybe about one other customer use cases that we saw, right? Exactly to your point, right? They have this sort of a journey, right? They have their Active Directory on-prem, right? They have, some elements in the cloud, right? And they probably, they wanted to get to sort of their cloud transformation journey, right? So they went backwards, right? What they said is, look, we'll solve the cloud transformation journey with you, but figure out how you can solve my legacy use cases too, right? So we help them, handle their Active Directory part, right? So, the PAM for Active Directory was handled again by the product, right? But this is the other way around, right? Because they already knew that we'll address their transformation problem and their migration problem, right?
Transformation work.
So what I'm trying to get at with this is that, other founders, right? And a lot of us come from the same background, right? We know about PAM, right? And we completely understand the pain that there is, right? What problem you're trying to solve. When you migrate, right? If you continue to think that, yes, that's going to solve my problem, it will, right? But at what step, right? You're going to go to the migration journey. Yeah, it's going to solve it, right? You go to the transformation. Now you're going to have a problem, right? So I think you need to look a little bit ahead of where you want to get to, or whether the solution will handle something now and it'll handle something 3 years later, right? Otherwise, you kind of get caught into, sort of your own little optics in your lens, right? It's almost solving a pain for today, right? But not thinking about the future. And that's the same problem that we have, right? We build the solution in the cloud, right? So we also thought about privileged access, right? The right way, if we went back to our old ways, you say, hey, we got to deal with something like this. So we go back and look for a solution that does something similar, right? Unlike a legacy solution. But that wasn't the case. We use our own products for our own access, right? Obviously, because we built a solution cloud native, right? More on the transformation side of the world, right? And that's pretty much why we use our own product, because that's the use case that it solves for us.
That's great insights. Thanks, Sameer. I think you're right. It's always the human. There's always a technology champion who's willing to seize things, who's willing to challenge the status quo in terms of willing to unlearn what they've learned and seeing things from a very fresh perspective of what problem are we solving, and is it a better way to build something new and different as opposed to continuing to advance your learning of legacy world, which sometimes may work, but when the rules of the game are changing, you also have to look for a new, better solution. Very, very great insight. And we're almost coming to a close here, but I wanted to ask this one last question about advice to other aspiring founders, innovators who have great ideas, who have problems to solve. They're trying to build, obviously SaaS solution in different clouds. What would be your advice, right? Obviously, this is something you have done along with your other founders. What would be advice? What challenges you can come across, and what would you say to them in terms of, any advice that you want to provide, especially if they're in the cybersecurity innovative area?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, right? I think when you think about it, right, ultimately you're solving for a pain, right? That's really what it comes down to, right? And the pain has to be enough that it has to be solved.
Yes.
Right? I mean, it can be different solutions, right? They do a bunch of things, but unless it's a real pain, it's not going to be adopted. And really, it's going to be hard to, get a buy-in from customers, right? Say, okay, we really need this solution, right? So first things first is address the pain point. The second part is, I'm going to piggyback what you said, Naman, is that I think all of us who've been in the industry for long enough, we end up doing things that we know, right? It's history, right? You kind of piggyback on everything that you have and try to build something you already know. I think you need to step back, right? 30,000 feet and say, well, here's a pain. I need to figure out how to address it and start thinking differently. So building a solution that does something better than what there was, right? But, kind of just adopting it to do something for a new environment like a cloud is probably not the right way to think about it, right? It has to be, of course, it has to be better, but it has to be different for it to to solve the problem that exists in the new ecosystem, right? So you need to start thinking a little bit differently. It's almost like saying, unlearn everything that you have, step back, assess the problem, and try and build a solution for that, right? Versus getting caught in the trap. I already know how to solve this. I'm just going to solve it the same way, right?
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. I fully agree. Do you have a favorite cloud provider for founders who are looking to invent something new? Do you think that one or two cloud providers are better than others in terms of starting something fresh and new, or do you think they're all getting better and equally comparable?
I think they are, right? I think here is the good part, right? Remember I told you about the cloud, right? In terms of what you want to get in terms of a service, right? The feature that they provide. When you look at the problem that you're trying to solve, you need to find the best solution for it and which service will work best, right? Some providers are probably stronger on the data side of the world. Some probably on the enterprise side of the world, like Azure, right, for example, right? And then you have AWS. So you need to really figure out what's the pain, when I say pain, it's not the customer pain, it's our pain, right? In terms of building the solution, what is the best service that you can get for it and use that, right?
Yeah.
In some ways of looking at it, there's also things like a rich area solution, right? How are you going to handle that, right? In terms of being able to move, right? And being able to provide the same solution on different clouds, right? A lot of these are things that you need to think of, and then you decide which provider you want to use. Obviously, you can have a primary, you can have a secondary, right? So it's really up to you.
Okay. What's your personal favorite, if you have one?
We use AWS.
Okay.
Right? And bits and pieces of GCP, that's where we are deployed on, right? We just committed to that. We looked at a few things and went on that journey.
That's great. No, I think I've seen that a trend in a way that AWS and GCP are more suited for startups. Obviously, Oracle and Azure have their own strengths as well, but this is where I see many startups gets born in one of these clouds.
Yeah. I mean, AWS, to be really honest, like I said, right, when we started this whole journey of like, okay, we got something to build, we looked at, for that time, what was the pain that we had, right? And like I said, serverless, right? We needed to think about different databases, right? And we just went all in, and AWS really helped us rapidly build stuff, right?
That's great.
You didn't have to worry about, how am I going to scale this, right? How am I going to secure it? What do I have to do for compliance, right? All of that stuff was already there. And all we had to do is just use what you have and build. Don't worry about the rest.
Yeah. Innovator's paradise. Yeah. I'm a big fan of AWS and GCP in terms of, not just the infrastructure, but the way they've developed their programs in terms of encouraging, incubating founders and helping them build new innovative solutions is just fantastic. So perfect. So one last question, and obviously, I always ask this question with my guest. What is one piece of advice that you would, or one lessons learned, one advice that you want to leave with your audience in general, from the perspective of the cloud security and identity journey?
Yeah, all right. Let's see. I think it's just maybe a couple of sentences, and I say this all the time, right? Your problems are going to be the same, right? But the way you solve them is going to be, different, right? And I think it's important that you embrace that. And like I said, right, don't go back into the mode of saying that I've solved it this way and I'm going to solve it the same way, right? Step back, look at what the problem is, figure out what there is, right, in terms of a solution, and then use that, right? I think we are all guilty of it, right? Like I said, we carry way too much baggage and history, and we all fall into that trap, right? But I think it's about time. It's like, like you said, there is a human aspect to it. It's realize that on your own and make sure that, you don't fall into that trap.
Fantastic. Great advice, Sameer. For people who wants to talk to you, want to get your advice, want to connect with you, where they can find you?
LinkedIn.
Okay, perfect.
Anytime available. Yeah, we could be definitely happy to talk to anyone about this.
Thanks, Sameer. Really appreciate it. And I enjoyed the conversation. There's sort of a lot of good nuggets here. I'm sure audience will find it very useful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tamat. Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.